It was a chilly autumn evening in 1977 when Officer Linda Hale radioed in for what would be the last time. The 27-year-old rookie had been patrolling a quiet coastal stretch outside Crescent Bay. California, her usual route. Nothing about that. Night seemed unusual at first. Locals remember the moon was full. The air smelled like salt and eucalyptus. And the waves crashed hard against the cliffs like they always did. But as the sun set and her shift ticked past its end, something shifted. Linda never checked back in. Her patrol car never returned to the station, and her radio went silent. It was as if she had simply vanished into the night. At first, no one panicked. Linda was known for being independent, sharp, and a little bit stubborn. Some of her colleagues thought she might have gone to check something out without reporting. It's something she'd been lightly scolded for before. But when the hours turned into a full day, concern turned to dread. The department sent out search teams. Helicopters flew over cliffs and canyons. Boats scanned the rocky shoreline, but there was no sign of Linda. No car, no footprints, no broken branches or tire marks, nothing. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. What made her disappearance? Even more chilling was her final call. Just minutes before she went missing, Linda had radioed in to say she was checking out a suspicious vehicle parked just off a cliffside turnout. She didn't give many details, just enough to get the dispatcher's attention. But before she could say more, the radio crackled and cut out. That was it. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. 13 years would pass before anyone. Got another clue. Linda wasn't just another name on a missing persons list. She was one of the first female officers in her department's history. She joined the force not long after graduating college, determined to serve her community and make a difference at a time when women in uniform were still rare. Her older brother, also a police officer, said she'd always had that spark, a mix of fearlessness and compassion. Colleagues described her as smart, brave, and always curious, especially about things others might overlook. That curiosity, they now believe, might have been what led her into danger. Over the years, her case grew colder. Investigators chased countless tips, some credible, most not. Psychics offered visions. Strangers mailed in strange letters, and one retired detective even spent his own savings chasing down a rumor that she'd been abducted by a cult. But nothing ever came of it. The department eventually closed the case, labeling it as unresolved, and Linda's name faded into memory. For a few who never stopped wondering. Among them was her brother, Mark Hale, who spent years pushing for new searches and re-interviewing old witnesses. He kept her photo in his wallet and visited that cliffside every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Then, in the summer of 1990, everything changed. A storm had rolled through the coast a few days earlier, tearing away part of the cliffside trail that had long been sealed off due to erosion. A group of hikers passing through the area spotted something unusual lodged in the rocks below rusted metal. Twisted wheels and what looked like the faint outline of a door with the word police barely visible beneath layers of rust and sea salt. At first, they thought it might be an old junk car, washed in from somewhere else. But as soon as they reported it, the local sheriff's office knew it had to be checked out. When search crews rappelled down to the site, what they found froze everyone in their tracks. It was, in fact, an old police cruiser, nearly unrecognizable from the damage it had taken over the years. It had clearly gone over the cliff and landed on the rocks below, hidden from view by a mix of jagged boulders and overgrown brush. The license plate was corroded, but Rita Bland matched the exact number from Linda Hale's missing patrol vehicle. But the most unsettling part? The driver's side door was bent open, and the car was empty. News of the discovery spread fast. The case was reopened, and forensics teams swarmed the area, collecting any trace of evidence that might still remain. How had the car ended up down there? Had Linda accidentally driven off the cliff, or had someone forced her off the edge? Was she injured and tried to climb back up? Or had someone been waiting for her at the bottom? As investigators sifted through the wreckage, questions multiplied. A torn piece of uniform fabric was found lodged in the rocks nearby, but no remains were recovered. The radio had been yanked from its mount. And strangely, the passenger door looked like it had been opened from the inside. For those closest to the case, it was both a breakthrough and a mystery, even deeper than the original disappearance. Because now, with the car found and still no trace of Linda's body, new theories began to surface. Some believed she survived the fall, but was too injured to escape the cove. Others thought she was taken after the crash, maybe by whoever she had been trying to report that night. Locals began to whisper again, especially the older ones who still remembered the search parties and candlelight vigils. They wondered if maybe the cliffs held more secrets, if something had been missed all those years ago. Linda's brother, now a retired officer himself, stood on that cliff edge once more, looking down at the spot where the ocean foamed and crashed. He said it felt like standing on the edge of an unfinished sentence. 13 years of silence, and now one rusted car had stirred it all up again. But this was only the beginning of what they would uncover. Because as they dug deeper into that night in 1977, into old records, sealed reports, and forgotten witness statements, something started to emerge. A connection no one had made back then. A pattern that pointed to something far more complex than a simple accident. And someone who might have had a reason to want Linda gone. What they found next would shake the town to its core, and finally force the truth into the light. Back in 1977, Linda Hale had a reputation that followed her everywhere: brave, determined, and maybe a little too bold for her own good. Some older officers didn't take her seriously at first. A young woman patrolling alone in a small coastal town wasn't something everyone was used to, but Linda didn't care. She showed up early, volunteered for the harder shifts, and knew every inch of the roads she covered. She didn't just want to wear the badge, she wanted to prove she earned it. But it wasn't just her work ethic that stood out. Linda had a gut instinct for when something felt off, and she wasn't afraid to follow it. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Linda had confided in a few close friends that she felt like something strange was going on during her night shifts. She never said exactly what, but she mentioned seeing the same unmarked car several nights in a row, parked near the cliff turnouts, always with the headlights off. Always gone by the time she circled back. One night, she even tried to approach it, but the car pulled away before she got close. She wrote it up in a report, but nothing ever came of it. The department was busy with a rash of burglaries in the nearby hills. And strange parked cars weren't exactly high priority, but Linda kept watching. And as the nights grew colder and darker that fall, she started telling her brother that she was sure someone was watching her too. He thought maybe it was just the stress talking. Being one of the few women on patrol came with pressure, and the long hours alone could mess with your mind. Still, he admitted later, something about her voice had changed in those last couple of weeks. She wasn't scared exactly, but she was alert more than usual. And she was writing everything down in a private notebook she kept in her glove box. That notebook was never found. When the wreckage of her patrol car was discovered in 1990, the town was still small, the kind of place where people remembered names and faces. The station hadn't changed much, same dusty desks, same coffee pot in the corner, and even some of the same officers still working the beat. And when news of the discovery reached them, old memories came flooding back. People remembered the sleepless nights, the theories, the way Linda's disappearance had divided the department between those who thought she ran into foul play and those who believed she might have just driven off the road by accident. But the damage to the patrol car didn't line up with a clean fall. The rear of the vehicle had deep dents on both sides, as if something or someone had hit it before it went over. Investigators ruled out a collision with a tree or rock. There weren't any in that area near the edge. The only way those marks made sense was if another vehicle had made contact, maybe even forced it off the road. But that theory opened up more questions than it answered. If Linda had been chased, who was behind her, and why? As detectives began combing through the old case file, they found something else, something no one had paid close attention to back then. Just 2 days before Linda vanished, she'd submitted a report about a break-in at an abandoned seaside warehouse near the cliffside. It wasn't her assigned zone, but she'd been in the area and responded to the call. She wrote it up as a possible vagrant situation, but something about the file felt rushed, like she didn't want to put too much on paper. And when officers returned to that same warehouse the following week, they found it completely empty, no signs of life, no evidence. Not even the broken window Linda had mentioned. It was like someone had scrubbed it clean. When questioned years later, one retired officer remembered something odd about that call. He said Linda had been unusually quiet when she came back that night. She skipped the usual banter, filled out her form, and left early, something she never did. He also said there was a man who came by the station asking about that call a day later. He wore a suit, said he was from an insurance company, and wanted to know what Linda had seen. But no one could remember his name, and no one ever verified his credentials. That detail was never written in the report. And then there was the missing radio call, the one where Linda mentioned a suspicious vehicle just minutes before she disappeared. When the old audio logs were pulled, something chilling stood out. The signal cuts off suddenly, not with static, but as if it had been deliberately interrupted. Radio signals can drop, especially in remote areas near the cliffs, but this one had an unnatural break, like someone had turned the unit off mid-sentence. That fact stuck with investigators, especially now that the radio unit in the car had been found torn from its base. That was never standard behavior, not even in a crash. Someone had wanted it disconnected. As detectives continued reopening old boxes and photographs, they found more inconsistencies. Witnesses from that night were re-interviewed, and one in particular stood out. A fisherman who had been camping near the shoreline swore he heard a car engine revving around midnight, followed by what sounded like metal scraping rock. He said he looked up and saw headlights flash once from the top of the cliff, but when he climbed up to check an hour later, there was nothing there. His report had been dismissed at the time, considered unreliable. But now, in the context of everything else, it suddenly seemed like a key piece of the puzzle. The deeper they dug, the more it seemed like Linda had uncovered something she wasn't supposed to see. And whoever was behind it made sure she never got the chance to explain. But what was it? A local smuggling operation? An inside job? The theories were endless, and each clue led to another dead end. But they all pointed to one thing: her disappearance wasn't an accident. And then came something even stranger. A former clerk at the department, who had worked there briefly in the early 80s, came forward after seeing news of the recovered vehicle. She said that one night, years after Linda vanished, she had been asked to shred an envelope of documents marked Hale Incident Follow-Up. At the time, she didn't think much of it. Orders were orders. But now, she realized that envelope Mitov held answers no one wanted the public to see. With every day that passed, more people came forward. Some remembered odd things about the weeks before Linda vanished: marked cars near the cliffs, late-night visits from men who didn't give names, and even whispers that someone high up had ordered the case to be quietly closed. Whether those were just rumors or part of something bigger remained unknown. But the pressure was mounting. And somewhere, beneath all the salt-stained memories, unspoken guilt, and closed files, the truth was still waiting to be uncovered. Because Linda Hale didn't just disappear, she was taken off the map, And whoever did it had gone to great lengths to make sure her story stayed buried, till the ocean finally gave back the first piece. But the most important clue, that was still out there, just waiting for the right eyes to find it. Mark Hale stood at the edge of the cliff where his sister's patrol car had been found just weeks earlier. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below felt different now, less like nature and more like a warning. 13 years of unanswered questions had weighed on him like a stone. Now, with the rusted car finally uncovered, he couldn't help but feel they were closer than ever. But closer to what? The truth. Or something even darker. He spent every day combing through his sister's old case files, her journals, and reports. Linda had been methodical. She wrote everything down, kept tabs on strange vehicles. Suspicious calls and details others thought were meaningless. One page stood out. It mentioned frequent activity after midnight near the abandoned warehouse. Same place she'd checked 2 nights before disappearing. That location kept circling back. Mark visited it himself now, sealed shut, padlocked, and overgrown. But the odd part, someone had recently cut the brush away from the side door. Fresh tracks. Someone had been there, and someone didn't want him looking too closely. Meanwhile, Detective Eliza Navarro, the lead on the reopened investigation, was getting pressure from above. She'd only just been promoted to major crimes when this cold case heated back up. And already, she was catching whispers that someone up the ladder wanted the Hale file wrapped up quietly. But Eliza had grown up hearing Linda's name. Her aunt had gone to the academy with her. She remembered how the story had haunted the town. And now that there was finally evidence in front of her, she wasn't backing down. Still, something about this case was making people nervous. Her emails were suddenly flagged. Files she had saved went missing. And when she requested access to the original 1977 radio logs, she was told they were lost in a fire. Convenient, there was another strange twist, too. A man named Charles Redford came forward after seeing the recent news. He claimed to be a former night shift dispatcher at the Crescent Bay Police Station during the late 70s, said he remembered the night Linda vanished like it was yesterday. At first, Eliza thought he might just be another attention seeker. But Charles had details, very specific ones. He said the night of Linda's last shift, she called in earlier than the report shows. She radioed to ask for backup before she ever mentioned the suspicious car. But that call was never logged. He said someone he never named who told him not to mention it again. And a week later, he was transferred to a desk job 3 counties away. Elisa pressed him, asking if he remembered who might have been on duty that night. Charles hesitated, then mentioned an officer named Russell Keene. Retired now, but back then, one of the most senior men on the force, and someone who had a habit of knowing more than he let on. Keene had been interviewed in 1977, but gave a short, generic statement, said he went home early and had nothing to do with the search. But what Charles remembered was different. He claimed Keene arrived back at the station past midnight, looking panicked, drenched in sweat, and said nothing to anyone. That detail never made it into the reports. Elisa paid Keene a visit. The old man was living in a small house on the outskirts of town. His memory had faded, but when Linda's name came up, he went quiet. His hands trembled, and he asked if the car had really been found. When Eliza confirmed it, his eyes glazed over. "I thought that would stay buried," he whispered. But before he could explain, he asked her to leave. Said it wasn't safe to talk. Elisa left her card, but her gut told her someone had gotten to him. First or still had something on him after all these years. As the investigation continued, Mark received an anonymous envelope at his house. No return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white, taken with an old film camera. It showed a police cruiser parked next to the warehouse. The timestamp, 1 day before Linda vanished. And in the driver's seat was someone who looked like her. But there was a second car in the frame too. One that didn't belong to the department. Unmarked, windows tinted. And in the background, barely visible, a man standing with something in his hands. It was impossible to tell what, but the image gave Mark chills. He brought it to Eliza immediately. She ran the photo through enhancement software, but it only brought more questions. The second car had plates government issue, but they didn't match any local agency. The image was old, but someone had taken it on purpose. Someone had been watching Linda, possibly documenting her. And if that was true, then she hadn't just stumbled onto a crime, she had become the target of one. The tension in town started to rise again. People whispered in grocery stores, at gas stations. A few of Linda's old friends who still lived in the area said they felt like someone was watching them too. One even found her mailbox ripped open with the contents missing. Elisa got a call from a tech at the department saying someone had tried to access her computer remotely. She started writing her notes by hand, keeping them locked in a safe at home. Something about this case was drawing out the kind of fear she hadn't felt since her early days on the job. Meanwhile, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that everything led back to that warehouse. But without a warrant, they couldn't touch it. Still, he circled the area at night, keeping an eye out. And one night, just before midnight, he saw a figure slipping inside through a side entrance. He waited in his car, heart pounding, camera ready. But the figure never came back out. The next morning, he returned. The side door was still slightly ajar. He stepped inside for the first time. It was dusty, filled with old crates and tools. But something was off. There was a faint humming noise coming from under the floorboards and beneath a loose section of concrete. He spotted metal stairs leading down into darkness, but he didn't go down, not yet, because Mark knew one thing for sure now. Whatever happened to Linda didn't end in 1977. It started there. Someone, maybe many someones, had spent the last 13 years making sure the truth stayed hidden. What they didn't realize was that truth was rising again, piece by piece, voice by voice, and the most important part hadn't been found yet. Mark and Eliza stood in the basement, both rattled by the presence that had just vanished into the shadows. Neither of them said much as they climbed the stairs back up into the warehouse. Every sound felt amplified, the wind against the walls. The creak of old beams, their own footsteps echoing like warnings. It was past midnight now, and the silence felt like it was holding its breath. They didn't know if they had just come face to face with the person behind it all, or if they had just scratched the surface of something much deeper outside. Mark scanned the area with a flashlight. "We're not alone," he said quietly. Eliza nodded. She didn't need convincing. She'd felt it in her bones the moment. The lights cut out. Whoever had been watching Linda in 1977 wasn't just some ghost of the past. They were active, present, and clearly trying to stay ahead of them. But what unsettled her most was how organized it all still seemed, like pieces of a system that had never truly been dismantled. As they returned to the car, Mark noticed something under the windshield. A folded slip of paper tucked beneath the wiper. No one had been near the car. They would have seen. Elisa opened it under the dome light. The message was short. "You should have stopped at the car." Her heart dropped. That meant the person knew where they had started the cliff. The message wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder that every move they'd made was being tracked. They drove back to town in silence. But halfway there, Mark's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just coordinates. Nothing else. He recognized the location immediately. It was a decommissioned ranger station off Highway 9, just west of the bluff where Linda's car had been found. The building had been abandoned for years. Rumors said it was once used for covert communications during the Cold War, but no one had gone near it in decades. Until now, Mark wanted to wait until daylight, but Eliza disagreed. If someone was baiting them, it was happening now for a reason. And if there was a chance it was connected to Linda, She wasn't willing to wait. They arrived just after 1 a.m. The old station was buried behind trees and brush, nearly invisible from the road. Its exterior was weathered, windows shattered. Door rusted, but there were fresh tracks in the dirt outside. Someone had been here recently, maybe still was. They entered slowly. The air inside smelled like mildew and dust. Most of the rooms were stripped bare. But in the back, they found something unexpected: an old locker. Chained shut with a rusted padlock, Elisa used her pocket tool to snap it open. Inside were sealed envelopes, audio tapes, and a large binder marked Internal Personnel 197-61979. They flipped through quickly. Dozens of names, photos, reports. But one file made Eliza stop cold. It was Linda's, but not her standard file. This one was marked Internal Surveillance, Eyes Only. Inside were pages tracking her movements, her shift changes, her phone calls, even photos of her sitting alone at a diner, photos dated just days before her disappearance. A typed note attached to the final report read, "Asset compromised. Recommend permanent removal. Cover at Site C to be initiated if event escalates." Mark stared at the words, disbelief on his face. They called her an asset, like she was part of something. Elisa didn't respond right away. She was flipping through the last few pages. That's when she found it. A second name, underlined, R. Hale. It wasn't Linda's, it was Mark's. At first, he laughed. "That's a mistake. I was never involved in anything back then. I was in college, but the documents said otherwise." They referenced phone calls between him and Linda in the weeks before she vanished. Said he had been warned not to pursue her line of inquiry. There were notes indicating surveillance on him too long after she was gone. Elisa looked at him carefully. "Is there anything you're not telling me?" Mark shook his head, but something in his eyes changed. A crack of doubt. "I swear I don't remember this. I never knew I was being watched." The file suggested otherwise. It said he had been flagged as a possible liability, and that 1 week after Linda vanished, he had tried to access police archives without clearance, something he never told anyone. As the pieces shifted, so did the feeling in the room. What if this wasn't just about Linda discovering a corruption ring? What if it had been bigger, something involving surveillance, internal operations, maybe even illegal programs buried so deep they were erased from official history? And then they heard it again, a click from the hallway. They turned. Flashlights raised another click, this time from behind them. The front door creaked open, footsteps, heavy, deliberate. They weren't alone in the station. Someone else had come for the files. Elisa reached for her sidearm and pulled Mark into the nearest room. She whispered, "We can't let them take what we just found. If they get it, it's over." Mark pulled the file to his chest, heart thudding. "They've been watching since the beginning. They know we're close." A shadow passed across the doorway. Someone was inside. Hunting the air in the station shifted again, thicker now, like the walls themselves were holding secrets too long buried. And as the footsteps grew louder, closer, and the flashlight beams danced across peeling paint and broken floorboards, Elisa realized they were at a turning point. Either they found the full truth, or the truth would find them first, and silence them just like it had Linda. The footsteps moved closer, slow and confident, as if whoever was in the station already knew exactly where Mark and Eliza were hiding. Elisa motioned for Mark to stay quiet and low. Her flashlight was off now, the only sound in the room there. Quiet breathing and the occasional creak from the wooden beams above. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then a shadow moved past the doorway. Elisa waited for a second, then sprang forward with her flashlight and badge raised. "Police? Don't move," she shouted. The man froze. He raised his hands, stepping into the light. His face was aged but familiar. Elisa blinked in shock. "Russell Keene," said. "You followed us here?" He nodded slowly. "You weren't supposed to find this place," he said, voice gravelly and calm. "I warned them this would happen if they didn't clean it all out." Mark stepped out behind Eliza, stunned. "You knew Linda. You were working the night she disappeared. What happened to her?" Keene's eyes didn't flinch. "She got too close. She figured out the whole operation, how the department was being used as a cover for surveillance programs. Not government ones. Private, off the books. She was documenting. Names, times, locations. She was going to leak it. She reported it," Eliza said firmly. "She trusted the system." Keene looked at her, a bitterness in his expression. "And the system turned on her. She was flagged by her own precinct. Orders came down fast. I never got the full story. But I knew something was wrong when her reports were pulled from the archive." Mark stepped forward. "Did you kill her?" Keene's jaw tightened. "No, I tried to stop it. But it was already too late. I think she was taken that night before the car ever hit the rocks. The wreck was staged. They dumped the car afterward to make it look like an accident." Elisa stared at him. "Who's they?" He hesitated, then said it was a group called Sentinel Operations. They used to operate out of Crescent Bay under another name. Hired by a few high-level people to keep certain inconveniences quiet. They infiltrated the department's slowly funded training, ran security briefings, all under the radar. Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. So this was never just a random disappearance. "No," Keene said. "It was a cleanup." Lisa felt a chill run through her. The files, the audio tapes, the warehouse, all of it had been a system designed to monitor, control, and erase people who got in the way. Linda Hale had been one of the few brave enough to shine a light on it. And for that, she paid the price. But there's more, Keene said, reaching into his coat. Elisa tensed, hand hovering near her sidearm. He slowly pulled out a worn envelope and handed it to Mark. "I found this 10 years ago. I never had the courage to do anything with it. But it's time." Mark opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph, an old one. Linda was sitting at a table, laughing with a young woman and a child. On the back was a note in Linda's handwriting. "If anything happens, take care of her." Eliza looked up. "Who's the woman?" Keene swallowed hard. "Her sister." "And?" "The girl, that's her daughter." Mark froze. Linda had a daughter. Keene nodded. "She never told anyone. Didn't want the department to know. She was afraid they'd use her against her." It hit Mark like a wave how much his sister had risked to protect her family, how much she'd fought, even in silence. "But what happened to them?" he asked. Keene looked away. "They disappeared 2 weeks after Linda did. No police report, no trace. That's when I realized how far Sentinel's reach really went." Suddenly, from outside, the sound of tires crunching gravel broke the silence. Elisa peeked through the boarded window. 2 black SUVs had pulled into the clearing. No lights, no markings. Doors opened slowly. Men stepped out, dressed in dark gear, faces hidden, moving with precision. "They're here," Keene said quietly. Eliza grabbed the files, motioned to Mark, and moved toward the back exit. "We have to go." Now, Keene didn't move. "There. Not after you," he said. "They're after what you have. Take it. Get it to someone who can expose it." "You're coming with us," Mark insisted. Keene shook his head. "I've been waiting for this moment too long. I'll buy you time." Before they could argue, he shoved a metal pipe through the front door handles and turned toward the hall. "Go. Don't stop." They ran through the back into the woods as shouts erupted behind them. Flashlights cut through the trees. Voices barked commands. But the forest was dense, and Eliza knew the terrain. She led them downhill, through brush and over rocks, until they reached the roadside near the old cliff turnout where Linda's car had been found. They stopped, breathless. Mark looked down at the ocean. She's still out there somewhere. I can feel it. Elisa reached into her coat, holding up the files. We have enough now. Enough to bring this into the light. Just then, Mark's phone buzzed again. Another. Anonymous message. She's not gone. Mark showed Eliza. Her face paled. Then who sent this? He asked, staring out into the darkness. And that's when it hit them. Linda's daughter was never missing. She was still out there, watching everything unfold, and maybe she had been fighting from the shadows all along. The morning fog rolled in thick across the cliffs. The ocean below, still and gray, like it was holding secrets beneath the waves. Mark stood at the edge, the folder in his hands now worn from the night's escape, his mind trying to piece together everything that had happened. 13 years after his sister Linda Hale vanished while on patrol, the truth had finally begun to surface, but not in the way anyone expected. The evidence they uncovered was more than a cold case update. It was a keyhole into something far bigger, a covert surveillance network buried beneath a small town's police department. A private group operating under the radar and the silencing of anyone who got too close. Beside him, Detective Eliza Navarro stared out toward the sea, her expression tired but steady. She had already made calls. Copies of the files, recordings, and photos had been sent to trusted contacts across different departments. A former federal prosecutor, 2 independent journalists, and 1 whistleblower organization had all agreed to receive sealed packages. It was no longer just about Linda. It was about the dozens of others who may have been swept under the same rug a few hours earlier. After escaping through the woods, Mark and Eliza had found temporary safety in a nearby ranger outpost, still in use. It was there that Eliza decoded a name hidden deep in the documents, a code signature labeled SH, with accompanying case summaries dated into the early 2000s. Shockingly, the reports didn't stop after Linda's disappearance. They kept going. New targets, new surveillance. And tucked at the bottom of one page was a file timestamped only 3 years ago. It was a driver's license photo. The name was changed, the details different, but the eyes were unmistakable. Linda's daughter. She hadn't disappeared. She'd gone underground. Elisa worked backward through the digital logs that night. Using a separate line, she called in a favor from someone she trusted in the cyber unit. Within hours, they tracked the anonymous messages sent to Mark. The location pinged from within Crescent Babe, not near the cliffs or the precinct. It came from a small coastal bookstore on the edge of town, an address that had been scrubbed from public listings but still registered in old census files. The owner's name on record, Emily Hart. Mark and Eliza drove there at dawn. The bookstore was tucked between a diner and a repair shop, its windows dusty, a closed sign hanging crooked on the door. But the lights were on. Mark approached. Slowly, his heart beating heavier than it had all night. He pushed the door open with a soft chime. Inside, a woman stood behind the counter. Maybe late 20s, maybe older, it was hard to tell. She had Linda's eyes. She didn't look surprised to see them. "You found it," she said quietly, glancing toward the folder in Mark's hand. He nodded. "Are you?" "I'm Emily," she replied, her voice calm but sharp. "She used to call me Em." Elisa stepped forward. "You've been watching everything. Why?" Emily looked at them both for a long moment. "Because I had to be sure that you weren't like them, that you weren't here to bury it like the others." Mark set the folder down. "Why didn't you come forward?" Emily let out a faint breath. Because for years, I didn't know who to trust. After my mother disappeared, I was hidden by people she worked with off the record. People she believed in. But over time, even they went quiet. I only survived because she planned ahead, left instructions. She knew something like this might happen. She motioned to the files. That's only a fraction of it. Eliza leaned forward. You've got more? Emily nodded. Some of it's digital, some hard copy. She kept backups evidence. Recordings. A full breakdown of Sentinel's operations inside. Crescent Bay. She even listed names. Politicians, officers, outsiders paid to keep things quiet. Mark was stunned. She knew everything. And she still went out that night. Emily looked down. She thought she had enough to make it public. But they moved faster. Mark reached for her hand. She would have been proud of you, Emily. Smiled softly, but her eyes stayed distant. She didn't want me to fight like this. She wanted to protect me from it. Elisa stood straighter. We can't stop now. We have everything we need to bring this into the light. But it has to be done the right way. No leaks. Full protection for anyone named. We need a federal team on it. External from Crescent Bay. Emily nodded. I already have names ready. Trusted contacts. That night, the three of them worked together, building the complete case. Elisa drafted a full report that would go to the state attorney general. By morning, Mark reached out to a local reporter who had once written about Linda's disappearance, and who had always believed something about the story didn't add up. Emily handed over the final recordings, some of which included surveillance clips of private meetings from decades ago, with clear audio that proved not just cover-ups, but targeted manipulation of patrol assignments and evidence tampering. Within 48 hours, the state launched a formal inquiry. News outlets began reporting the story with headlines like, Cold Case Cop Uncovers Secret Network and Officer Linda Hale's Disappearance Was No Accident. New evidence shows. The name Sentinel operations trended across investigative platforms. And those involved in the cover-up, some still active in smaller roles, began to surface under pressure. Keene, a former officer who stayed behind at the ranger station, was found unconscious by search teams. He had been beaten, but he survived. His testimony helped connect several final dots. He confirmed that Linda Hale had confronted her superiors directly. He was in the room, and he had always regretted not stopping what happened next. With legal teams involved, Crescent Bay's leadership changed almost overnight. Arrests followed. A task force was created to dig deeper into departments statewide for similar patterns. Linda's case was officially changed from missing to killed in the line of duty, and her name was honored in a ceremony that brought people from every part of the state. Mark stood at the podium that day, speaking softly but clearly. My sister wasn't just a patrol officer. She was a truth-teller, and even when the system tried to silence her, she left enough behind for others to carry it forward. She believed in doing what was right, even if no one believed her at the time. After the crowd dispersed, he walked down to the cliff one more time. The waves still broke against the rocks below, but now they felt different, like the weight of all those years had lifted. He left a single rose at the edge, not as a goodbye, but as a thank you. Beside him, Emily stood quietly. Her mother's badge was in her hand. Maybe it's time I stop hiding, she said. Mark looked at her and nodded. Or maybe it's time you finally get to live. In the end, Linda Hale's story wasn't just a tragedy, it became a turning point. For her family, for the town, and for every person who ever feared their voice wouldn't matter. Because sometimes the truth doesn't rise all at once. Sometimes it waits in the shadows, gathering strength, until the right moment. And when that moment comes, no amount of silence can keep it buried. Elisa stood frozen in Gilmore's kitchen, staring at the back of the photo in her hand. Her eyes scanned the words again, almost afraid she'd misread them. CB Warehouse, final report due. Destroy if needed. The handwriting looked rushed, panicked even. Her mind was racing now. If this note was Lagitant, she had no reason to think it wasn't. It meant Linda had been working on something bigger than anyone imagined, and someone had been helping her cover it up, or stopping her from exposing it. She snapped a picture of the note, then shoved the frame into her bag. She turned to call Mark, but still got no answer. The woods behind the house were dead silent. No footsteps. No voices. Just that eerie feeling that someone, somewhere, was still watching. She stepped back outside and scanned the yard, her flashlight sweeping across trees, grass, shadows. "Mark," she shouted, her voice sharp and urgent. Still nothing. The wind had picked up. Dry leaves rustled through the brush like whispers. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Then headlights appeared in the distance. Lisa turned quickly, ready for anything. But it was Mark's car. He pulled up fast, jumped out, breathing heavy. His hands were scraped, his jacket torn. He looked like he'd just wrestled through a forest. "Someone was following us," he said, his voice strained. "I saw them. A man in a hood, watching from the tree line. I chased him, but he vanished. Just gone. He looked shaken, and I found this." He pulled something from his Paquita key. Small, rusted, with the initials CB carved into the side. He said he found it near a cinder block half buried in the brush, like someone had stashed it on purpose. Elisa stared at it, realization settling in. That might be the warehouse lock. She said quietly. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then they got in the car and headed straight back toward the warehouse. No more waiting, no more guessing. The closer they got, the more the tension built. Every turn in the road felt heavier. Every glance in the mirror more urgent. Elisa gripped the wheel tighter than usual, her eyes flicking toward the dark trees lining the roadside. Mark sat in silence, the key turning in his fingers again and again. When they pulled up, the sky was moonless. Clouds hung low and heavy. The building loomed in the shadows, its windows long since boarded. But the side door was still slightly ajar, just like before. They moved carefully this time. Elisa had her flashlight in one hand, her badge tucked tight into her coat, and her heart hammering in her chest. They stepped inside. The warehouse was quiet. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The broken tiles on the floor crunched under their boots. Everything smelled old wood, rust, damp concrete. They moved toward the back where the stairs had been. Elisa flicked the light toward the floor end. There it was. The hatch was open. Someone had already been down there. They paused at the top of the stairs. A soft sound echoed up barely there, but enough to raise every hair on their arms. It wasn't a voice. It was a hum, just like Mark had heard before. But deeper now, more intense. They descended slowly, each step creaking, until the basement swallowed them again. The hallway was darker than before. At the end, the same steel door. Elisa reached for the key in Mark's hand and slipped it into the lock. Click, it turned. The door creaked open. What they saw inside didn't look like an evidence room anymore. It looked like it had been cleared mostly. One long table remained, with 2 file boxes, a chair tipped over, and a map pinned to the far wall. The map was of Crescent Bay and the surrounding cliffs. Red circles marked multiple areas along the coastline, including the exact spot where Linda's patrol car had been found. Alongside the map were scribbled notes, code names, and strings of initials. RG was there. So was K.E. Keene, and in bold letters underlined twice, LH, active threat. Mark backed away, the weight of that line sinking in. Elisa stepped. Forward eyes locked on a manila envelope at the edge of the table. She opened it slowly, and inside were surveillance photos old grainy of Linda again and again. At gas stations, outside the precinct, talking to someone whose face was always turned away. But in one photo, a clearer angle showed the person. Linda had been meeting with Raymond Gilmore. That changed everything. He was helping her, Eliza whispered. But then he went silent. Mark looked around the room again, the strange hum still present, now seeming to pulse through the walls. Someone built this place for one reason, he muttered. To hide whatever was going on. But why is it still running? Then the light bulb above them flickered once, twice, and cut out. Total darkness. Elisa froze. The flashlight in her hand died just as quickly. Static buzzed briefly in her earpiece, then nothing, not even the hum. Just silence. Did you bring a second light? She asked. Mark didn't answer. Eliza's voice was behind her, farther than it had been. She turned sharply. Mark. Silence again. Then footsteps. Not hers, not his. Slow, measured. Coming from the hallway they'd entered through, a figure appeared in the shadows. Neither of them could make out the face, just a tall frame, blocking what little ambient light filtered in from above. The person didn't speak, didn't move any closer, just stood there, watching. Elisa reached for her badge, for anything that might anchor her to the moment. But before she could speak, the figure stepped back and vanished. She rushed forward, flashlight flickering back to life for just a second, long enough to reveal nothing. The hallway was empty again. Mark reappeared a moment later, breathless, saying he'd tried calling out, but she never responded. That someone had passed between them. Someone had been there, watching, listening. They had confirmation now that the warehouse was still active, that someone had kept it functional all these years, that Linda had been closer to something dangerous than anyone had realized, and that the people responsible weren't just relics of the past. They were still here, and they weren't finished, not by a long shot.